It doesn't matter where you are on the journey. It doesn't matter where the journey's going to, but just get on it, because you really, I promise you, I honestly, you can see my kind of, again, my body language. I honestly promise anyone who's listening, try it. Just, you will not regret it.
Hi, my name is Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, medical doctor, author of the 4-Pillar Plan, and television presenter. I believe that all of us have the ability to feel better than we currently do, but getting healthy has become far too complicated. With this podcast, I aim to simplify it. I'm going to be having conversations with some of the most interesting and exciting people, both within as well as outside the health space, to hopefully inspire you, as well as empower you with simple tips that you can put into practice immediately to transform the way that you feel. I believe that when we are healthier, we are happier, because when we feel better, we live more. Hello and welcome to another episode of my Feel Better, Live More podcast. My name is Rangan Chatterjee and I am your host. Today's conversation is one of inspiration and hope with the one and only Vassos Alexander. Vassos is well known for being the sports presenter on the biggest national radio program we have here in the UK, the Chris Evans Breakfast Show. He is also the author of 2 best-selling books, which are all about his experience of how running has changed his life. I think you are going to really enjoy the frank and honest conversation I have, and I genuinely think it's going to inspire you to think about movement and running a little bit differently. Now, before we get on to today's conversation, I am pleased to announce an ongoing partnership with Athletic Greens, who are the sponsors of today's show. I know from the growing popularity of this podcast, as well as the feedback, that many of you are really enjoying the podcast and look forward to each weekly episode. Now, in order to support the time and expense it takes to put these podcasts out, I have taken on a sponsor whose vision is really well aligned with my own, to help people feel better so that they can get more out of life. As you know, I believe that the right nutrition is an essential ingredient to having a healthy and happy life. And there's no question that I prefer people to get their nutrition from eating food, but these days that can be a little bit challenging for many of us. We might be busy, on the go, rushing around, and even with the best intentions, on some days, it can be a little bit tricky to cook a wholesome, nutritious meal. Now, if you feel that this might apply to you and you want to take something each morning as an insurance policy to make sure that you are meeting your nutritional needs, I can highly recommend Athletic Greens. It is a super tasty whole food greens powder that you can take each morning, and unlike most green supplements that I've tried in the past, it tastes fantastic. In fact, my kids absolutely love it. I love the company ethos, and I have to say that it is unquestionably one of the most nutrient-dense whole food supplements that I've come across. For listeners of this podcast, if you go to athleticgreens.com/live more, you will be able to access a special offer where you get a free travel pack box containing 20 servings of Athletic Greens, which is worth around £70 with your very first order. So do go and check it out at athleticgreens.com/live more. Now, on to today's conversation. So Vassos, we're actually here in your studio. I have been listening to your breakfast show with Chris Evans for, I think I can remember the first episode actually. I think it was in my car driving to a hospital, I think, and actually listening. And I'm actually here, sitting in it now, talking to you, which is a bit nuts. Is that your seat, or is that where Chris normally sits?
This is Chris's seat, and I love the fact that you called it my breakfast show with Chris Evans. Yeah. That's how I think of it too. No, this is where Chris sits, and he does all the button pressing, and that cart wall over there has all our sound effects and all various things. So I usually sit in that chair over there by the window.
Wow. Yeah, I can see thousands of pounds worth of technological equipment here. And I brought my portable little podcast recorder with 2 mics, and you are very kindly holding the mic to your face. So I kind of I feel we're going a bit lo-fi in this very hi-fi
This
setting.
is exactly what we use for the Park Run podcast, the Free Weekly Time, which you kindly came on last week. Exactly the same recorder. Producer Patrick has one of these. You can have 4 microphones. You can put your headphones in. It's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Well, Vassos, look, I've sort of, having heard you for many years on the radio, but also on TV a couple of times, I think, I've been very interested in seeing what's been in the media about your story, in particular, your story as a runner. And this morning I was on the train down to London and I was looking through some stuff that you'd written. And you wrote a Telegraph article, I think, probably around the release of your last book. And you said your story's pretty simple, really. And I think it was something like you were sitting in a pub, eating a packet of crisps, realizing you were a little bit unhealthy, so you decided to run. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit.
Actually, I'll tell you the moment. The moment was, I was sitting in a pub a lot in those days, but the moment was a set of traffic lights on my way to read the sports news, I think, at Radio 5 Live. I'd just been playing golf. I was on the late shift. And I was at a set of traffic lights. And my shirt, unusually for me, because I'd been playing golf, was tucked into my trousers. And I just noticed a little kind of a flop of fat, quite literally a kind of spare tyre, wrapped in a yellow golf shirt, flopping over my belt. And I thought, oh my goodness, I was in my early 30s at this stage. And I thought, okay, so here's the deal. You're no longer in your 20s. You either stop eating what you like, or you start exercising, or you get fat. And I remembered a late night drive back from Oxford to London with Steve Bunce, he's a boxing expert, but he's well-known sports commentator. Yeah. And in his kind of North London bark of a voice, he said, Vass, let me tell you something. I'm getting older. I'm getting fatter. I'm getting happier. And I thought, well, we're going the Buncey route, I'll just get older and fatter and happier. But something kind of, I just didn't ring true. I thought, look, that's all sort of like giving up. And I didn't like the idea. I was about to become a father. I didn't like the idea of being unhealthy. So I thought, well, let me try a gym. And I the same day on the way to the bar at Television Centre, the bar is right next to the gym in the old BBC club. And so I went into the gym on the way to the bar. And I booked a personal training appointment with a guy called Andrew, great guy. And then I was sort of slightly too scared to, the next morning, through a mild fog of hangover, I'm slightly too scared to cancel it. And so I turned up and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. When you first do exercise, having not done exercise, it's not an easy thing. But I sort of stuck with it for a little bit. And then I went for my first outside run. Around about that time, after, I don't know, a couple of weeks. And suddenly it was as if a kind of a fog had been lifted. So, okay, this is what exercise can be. It just seemed to tick so many boxes. Yes, it was hard. And yes, actually, I started running and I didn't get to the end of my street because I came out of my front door and I thought, oh, my neighbours are going to see me here. So they're not going to see me go slowly because I'm too proud. So I steamed off down the street, got to the end of the street, realised that I actually had run out of puff. So I sort of hung over a wall of a neighbour of ours, getting my breath back, at which point that neighbour with a few other friends came out of her house, said, what are you doing? And I went, oh, I'm going for a run. She goes, what, you've just got this far? Like 200 yards down the street? And I went, no, I've actually finishing my run. And
This is my warm down.
So I always finish it here by your wall and then I walk home. So having announced to my wife that I was going for my first run, kind of 2 minutes previously, I'd got to the wall and then Sophie says, well, we're walking that way as well. We'll walk home with you. So I had no choice, but I had to then walk back through the front door to kind of merciless taunts from Caroline, my wife. Said, what, your first run lasted how long? 1.5 minutes. I told her what had happened, but I stuck with it. I just stuck with it. I realized that, it was getting myself not just outside, which is great.
Yeah,
and one of the key things I think about running is just doing it outside, but also outside of my own comfort zone. And whether that meant running for sorry, this is a very long answer, but whether that meant running for a minute and then walking for 30 seconds and then expanding that to 2 minutes before you walk, and then 3 minutes and 4 minutes, and then suddenly realizing I don't need any walking breaks anymore. I can just slow down the run a little bit, and then just go. And then it just snowballed, but snowballed in a good way. And I sort of realized that this had been the thing, funnily enough, because I'd never run before, that had been missing from my life.
I mean, and that's incredible, Vassos. And there's so many things that I think people will resonate with on that. On your story, basically. How old were you when you were, when that moment hit you that actually you saw that roll of fat under your yellow golf shirt?
Yeah. I was early 30s, maybe 32, maybe 33, that sort of area.
And prior to that, would you say that you have been someone who, because I'm looking at you now, you look fit, you look slim. Would you say in general that you were someone who actually didn't really need to pay much attention to their lifestyle, yet could sort of get away with it?
Absolutely got away with it. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm not tall like you, but I'm 6 foot, and I just never considered myself to be anything other than kind of slender until that moment with a yellow fat. And I had a very unhealthy lifestyle, to be honest. I smoked. I gave up the smoking before I started running. That was a sort of the moment Caroline became pregnant with Emily, our first. The cigarettes left, although they were replaced by nicotine gum for a while. But it was just, I just never really thought about my health. And, becoming a dad makes you, makes you sort of reevaluate stuff. And that was the reason that I didn't take the, older, fatter, happier lifestyle. And by the way, I couldn't be happier that I didn't. And I think if,
Well, that's a really important message, isn't it? We'll go on your running journey, actually, to the fact that you run ultra events now, which is remarkable because you're saying in your early 30s, you couldn't actually run for more than a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
If that.
And what was the latest ultra event you completed? There was something in Greece, wasn't there?
Yeah, this is, listen, stop me if I get boring on this, but I love this event. This is a real historical event.
But I just want people listening to this just to remember that it wasn't that long ago that Vassos couldn't run more than a couple of minutes, basically.
Yeah. And it was, I don't like saying it because it sounds kind of full of pride, but you do have to qualify for this event. It's one of the iconic, if not the iconic. I don't really like the term ultra running because it sounds exclusive. Yeah. It sounds like only ultra fit, ultra honed athletes need apply. And I make my living as a sports reporter, and I've been and witnessed and been around an awful lot of sports. And actually, exactly the opposite of exclusivity is true of. I prefer the term endurance running because you go to the start line of an event like a 50-mile race, which sounds kind of so ridiculous, to run that sort of distance. But it's the most welcoming and all-inclusive, and all sorts of sizes and shapes are on the start line, and everyone will be pleased to see you. And it's not really about the time; it's about the mindfulness aspect. And I'll get on to that. But this particular event, it's probably the longest single sort of shot event that there is. Yeah, there are longer ones, but you sleep in between. It's 153, I think it is, miles between Athens and Sparta. Wow. And you're following in the footsteps of you may have heard of this ancient Greek messenger called Philippides, who ran from Marathon to Athens to deliver news of a military victory, and died on the spot. Yeah, basically, he delivered his message and died. And he gave birth to what we now call the marathon, and millions of people take part every year. Well, we've got him to thank for it. Only he's just a little bit derided, isn't he? I mean, if you think about it, you're an elite messenger and you can't survive a jog from Marathon to Athens. Well, if you rewind that story a few days, when the Persians, this massive, bloodthirsty army of Persians arrived on shore in Marathon, having kind of ransacked all before them, if you were in Athens, you would have been petrified, because basically this nascent democracy, this was all going to end. You were all going to die.
Yeah.
And they thought, well, we have one hope. This is sort of peaceful, loving city-state, the Athenians. We have to go to Sparta across the mountains in the Peloponnese and ask for help. And there was no kind of, telephoning, the local Spartan mayor, you had to send somebody. And the best they had was this guy, Phidippides. So they sent him across the 153 odd miles to Sparta to ask for Spartan help. Let's meet in Marathon. Let's try and cut them off there. It's our only hope, was the message. Because the Persians have arrived, and Sparta would have been equally, although they were sort of a bit more kind of warrior-like, the Spartans, they would have been equally terrified of the invading Persian army. So he made that trip to Sparta. It ended well for everybody. And then reading an account of that, it always comes down to the eccentric Brits. It was an RAF officer who read that Phidippides arrived before night fell on the second day, and he thought, well, that's just not possible to do that distance in 36 hours. So he thought, I'll give it a go. And he failed completely, but it really captured the imagination of the Greeks. And so now this race is born, the Spartathlon, and loads of people. I think you've had to have run a 100-mile race in under 20 hours just to get on the start line. And hardly anyone finishes, because trust me, an awful lot can go wrong in 150 miles. And they back time it. So you have to do the first marathon out of the undulating hills out of Athens in something like 3 hours 45.
Wow.
So they make it they make it really hard. And then the the cutoffs, and there are cutoffs every 2 or 3 miles. Otherwise you're out.
You're out unless you meet that criteria.
Yeah.
Wow.
But the Greeks, and I'm Greek, and so maybe this was it was my kind of Everest.
Yeah.
They feel strongly that you're honouring their past and their culture and their history by running the race, which of course you are.
Absolutely.
But you go through tiny villages in the middle of the night and everybody's up. Children, grannies, everybody's up. The tavernas are open. Come in, eat what you like. Thank you for doing this race. And then you reach Sparta, and the whole town is celebrating the lunatic few that managed to finish this race. And instead of crossing a finishing line, you touch the feet of the warrior king in the center of the town, and it's just one of the most extra. The local children take your hand and escort you through the town as you finish.
It sounds incredible.
It was just one of them.
It almost transcends, culture. You're paying homage to the heritage of the place, and everyone gets involved. It sounds like.
And if you kind of rewind even further, the way that we were. There's a book, and it's a sort of almost like a holy script of ultra running or endurance running called Born to Run. And you'll know this, that we are back in the day, we were endurance hunters. We didn't, the reason we don't look like Neanderthal man, who was stronger and faster than we are, is because we worked out that the best way to get our food was to basically wear down the deer across the African savannah.
Yeah. You touch on this in your books, right? This whole
the Born to Run thing. So, but the fact that I was honouring an old Greek messenger who was doing the job of his ancestors. That we are runners. That's why we look like we. So you sort of feel like you're doing right by your DNA as well as by your heritage, your Greek history. So that's why that race. And that's why I've gone on about it so long.
No, but you can see in your body language and everything about as your body language changes as you talk about it. You're lighting up, your face is smiling as well as your mouth. Everything about you is changing. There's obviously such pride there and delights that not only did you qualify, but you went and did it.
Yes, I'm so I hear a lot of sports people say, I'm so humbled to have won the gold medal. And I think you don't mean that at all. You're not humble. But I honestly, because of everything, I do feel so humbled to have been able to even take part in the race, let alone finish it. And it's almost like becoming a dad, to be honest. And actually, when I first finished it was a 100-mile race. The joy I felt on crossing the finishing line wasn't this euphoric joy. It was sort of better than that. It was this deep contentment, like when each of my children was born. I carried this kind of private bubble of everything's okay with the world around with me for weeks, and I did again at the end of the 100-mile race for some reason. And I will put finishing the Spartathlon up there with the birth of my children, and I don't do that because I'm not a good father and I don't care about my children. I'm doing it because that was so important, I guess, on my own personal journey.
Yeah. Would you do it again?
Yeah, so interesting. Yes, of course. But Caroline, if you're listening to this, No, I wouldn't. I did actually, between us, you can auto-qualify for it by doing a certain, 20% quicker than any of the qualifying criteria, and you're straight and you don't have to go through the ballot. And I didn't apply with having auto-qualified.
Right.
Because I think my first 100 miles were quick enough to make the next 53 really difficult, but B, to auto-qualify. But I didn't apply because it's not fair on my wife and kids that I keep on going off and doing these ridiculously long runs.
I imagine the training for that must be pretty intense. And
it's not too bad at all. I mean, people who do long triathlons, Ironman triathlons, and I've done that as well, or even these cycling sportives, which are all great, by the way, but the training takes, you need to do a 5-hour bike ride or a 4-hour bike ride. You very rarely need to run for 4 hours, even in training for something like this.
Really?
They say that I was going to call it an ultra, having just said I don't like calling them ultra.
Yeah, I guess that is the common name though, isn't it? I guess.
They say that, let's say, 100-mile race is 90% in the mind and the other 10% is also mental. And they're pretty much right. Maybe the first 30, 40 miles are in the legs and the rest is in the mind. But, it is all about, because it doesn't matter how fast you're going. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It's just about, putting one step in front of the other. So you have to have a certain level of fitness. You can't just turn up at a 50-mile race and expect to be able to finish it from nothing. But if you can finish a marathon, then I think you can probably finish. No, not probably, definitely finish.
It sounds like once you've reached that base level of fitness that you require to do a long distance event, as you say, like a marathon, then the remainder of it is in your mind.
Yeah.
And I guess that's quite interesting because a few episodes ago on the podcast, I spoke to a guy called Rich Roll. He's a guy who's based in LA, and he was, he turned 40, and on the outside everything looked amazing. He had a good job. He was a flash corporate lawyer in LA. He had a fancy sports car, nice house, but he was an alcoholic. And I think internally he was using alcohol to sort of, hide from the things in his life that he didn't like. And one day he was walking up his stairs and he was getting chest pain. And, that was one of his big awakening moments that, wait a minute, I've got children, I've got a family, I'm not happy and I'm not fit, I'm going to die soon. And he's basically turned his whole life around. He's quit alcohol, he's, revolutionized his diet. And now Men's Health called him a few years ago one of the fittest men on the planet. He runs ultra endurance events.
I know him. Yeah.
Oh, you know Rich. Yeah. And we had a great conversation. And I was talking to Rich about, on these endurance events, he was talking about the mental side of it. And I was asking him, and I'll probably ask you this question, Vassos. Do you learn things about yourself on those long events that you can't learn, or it's hard to learn in the minutiae of daily life?
Absolutely. I think you've almost hit the nail on the head. I wish we'd had this chat before I wrote my second book, but because you've encapsulated it beautifully. You strip away the layers. Chrissie Wellington, the Ironman world champion, once told me, and she's great, by the way, both as a sports person and as a human being. But she once told me that, and I should tell anyone, that the reason she retired after her 4th world championship in Hawaii is that race, she couldn't there were no more layers, that she that was the bottom of her well. It was almost the perfect race. There's nowhere else to go. And I felt that a little bit in Sparta. I literally couldn't, I touched the statue having run. You sort of charmingly, you kiss the feet of the statue.
Yeah,
and
amazing.
Then you go into this medical tent. But I lost the use of my legs for a week afterwards, which is dramatically more than usually happens to.
What does that mean? You lost the use of your legs for a week?
I couldn't walk. I was a wheelchair through the airport. I was Zimmer frame. I could haul myself around, but only through my arms, because I had, it never happened before to me in a race, but I had reached my there were no more layers to me. That I
stripped away everything.
I only got to the finishing statue, not line, because I really wanted it. It was, my body had given up, but my kind of internal commander just found a way. to just get the job done. Even when I arrived in Sparta, and you come into this, I've been thinking about this for 30 odd hours, this moment. You come into Sparta, and there was an aid station with like some food and some volunteers helping you. Can I help you? And I thought, well, this is it, because I could see the timing mat. And in the last 150 miles, there'd only been 3 timing mats or 4 or something. So I thought, well, they're not going to have one. I thought there was a statue, but obviously there isn't, or I just can't see it. But they wouldn't have a timing mat here and another timing mat at the end. So this must be it. This is it. And he goes, there's only a kilometre. Oh, he said 2.5 kilometres to go, which is like 1.5 miles. And I seriously considered giving up then, because I in my head, I'd reached that, I'd seen that timing mat. It'd only been a minute that I thought that I just reached there. I was done.
You thought you were done, and so you'd almost probably process that in your mind and go, oh yeah, we've got it, we've made it, the euphoria.
And then to be able to have to sort of remotivate myself to kind of crawl almost that last 1.5 miles through to, actually the kids came and took my hand, and it wasn't that hard in the end. But to answer your initial question about, whether you find stuff out about yourself, absolutely, and you work stuff through, and it's just that, the you that emerges from the discomfort, because let's not mess about here. It's not all a great big smile. It does hurt. In a very
mentally and
way.
Physically, both. It hurts both.
Yes, it hurts physically, and you reach. If my wife calls me during one of these events, and it's low intensity, so we were talking about park runs, and if you and I are going to sprint a park run, a 5K, that's 20 odd minutes of high intensity. That hurts in a physical way.
Yeah. This
hurts in a physical way, as in your legs will feel trashed and all sorts of odd things will happen in your stomach. And yes, but it hurts in a mental way in that you've got none of the usual defenses around you. My wife calls me and I just cry, but in a kind of good cathartic way. And the you that emerges from the discomfort of an endurance run like that is a better version of the you that went in. Somehow it's like, stripping down an engine and putting it back together slightly better.
It sounds like you almost go through, I can't put a number on it, but multiple intense therapy sessions with yourself whilst you're on this event.
But without actually doing it, without thinking about, I must think about my childhood and this that might be, you just do it. It's just happening in the background. And it's like, I said, doing right by our DNA, our genes.
Yeah.
Somehow, because this is what we're meant to do, getting ourselves, look at us. We're sitting in a warm studio, although not as warm as it should be because the air conditioning still hasn't been fixed. We moved out. of here for 3 weeks so that they could fix the air conditioning, and it's a bit chilly in here, isn't it? Anyway, but we're sitting down. We're in chairs.
It's all comfortable, right?
Yeah. You've come down on a nice train.
Yeah.
You walked through London, but you didn't have to. You could have taken a cab.
I chose to. Yeah.
Our lives are so comfortable, but sometimes getting out of that and stripping it back and getting uncomfortable is the best thing for us. And you really realize that very strongly, I think, when you're on it doesn't have to be, 100-mile run. Actually, it can be any run. It can even be on a treadmill, but I think that the experience is heightened if you're outside, because you experience as well what the Japanese, I think, call it nature bathing.
Yeah, or forest bathing, I think they call it.
Yeah. Where it gets prescribed, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, that's
just go into nature.
For me, that's one of the benefits of park run. Actually, and a park run is, for me, it's so much more than the run. And we'll come on to park run, because I think park run is really important to talk about. In fact, that's how we first got connected, is to come on your park run podcast. And we're both big fans of park run. Something that really strikes me, Vassos, is that you say it's hardwired into our DNA. We've always run. And there's something in that, isn't it? In this technological era that we're living in, where everything is so comfortable, ultimately running is still the same. You put on a pair of shoes and you're out. There's very low barriers to actually running. And I'm wondering, is there something about the beautiful simplicity in running?
Absolutely. And it's so, first of all, on a practical level, my daughter Emily, she's 14, she's great, she loves rowing. She rows at somewhere called Molesey, which is a non-tidal part of the Thames, but where we live in Barnes, very close to another very convenient part of the Thames, it takes a while to get to. So she will get out of the front door, take a bus and a train and then another train and then walk to her rowing club. And by the time she's on the water doing exercise, I could have left the house, done an 8-mile run, be home and showered. So on a practical level, she has to jump through a lot of hoops before she gets to her exercise. But mind you, she loves it and she wouldn't swap it for the world. And I love what rowing's doing for her. So no, nothing against rowing or, triathlons. I love triathlons. We mentioned Chrissie, but, I know the Brownlee brothers and they're 8 and Vicky Holland, who's just won the world championship. But I turn up at triathlons and without fail, I will have forgotten something, even if it's,
equipment, something that you... Yeah.
Goggles, wetsuit, my key to take the D-lock off my bike.
Yes.
It's just,
just faff.
It's just faff. And some people love that, don't get me wrong. Some people love all the equipment and that stuff. But just on a practical level, you have to put a pair of shoes on. And back in the day, not even that. And go for a run. And it's outside your front door.
I've got to say, that's what I found because I did a bit of running at school. But then I wouldn't say I was I ran through my 20s or 30s. I didn't really do that. I was sporty. I would, I like playing squash. I like going to the gym. I generally keep fit. But I think there's something about, being a father, having a busy job, like many people, everyone's busy these days. And the fact that, life's pretty unpredictable. I don't know, when the kids are going to need this or that, or when I'm going to be... I don't live in London, when I'm going to be down in London. I feel, you've seen me, I've come in my bag, so I'm in London for 3 days now. And the one thing I will bring with me is my running shoes and a t-shirt and some shorts, because I know that no matter what the weather is in the morning, I'll just get up and go for a little run. And sometimes it's a 10-minute run. Sometimes it's literally just 10 minutes to get a bit of fresh air in the morning. And I love that about running. And as I said on the Part Run podcast, what got me into it really was my son noticed this guy in our local park just finishing this sort of organized run event a few years back, and he asked me what it is. I said, don't know. And we went and asked him, and he said, it's this thing called Park Run. And literally, since then, I've been taking him every Sunday and now my daughter on the junior park run. And I started doing the 5K on a Saturday with my son. And it's just the most incredible experience because he loves it as well. And I agree. I think it is hardwired into us because you feel free.
Well, you're doing it. I mean, again, nothing against people who like running on treadmills, but honestly, try it outside, especially if it's not horrible weather.
Yeah.
Because it's another level. It's another level of, you're outside, you're doing what we were meant to do. And, and on that, practical level, it's just easy. You're just running. And what is it? Maybe, I think it's Leonardo Da Vinci. Yeah, I might be wrong about this. I'm often wrong about stuff like this. I'm almost certainly wrong about this, but just in case I'm right,
it's famous
philosopher. I think it was Leonardo da Vinci who said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, and I sort of feel like that about running.
Yeah, there's no question. Yeah, there's absolutely no question that whoever said that was spot on. I think simplicity really is key, and. I'm a GP, so I'm often seeing patients who the idea of listening to you talk about 100-mile race, it probably doesn't. I'm guessing on some level it won't connect with them in the sense that
it won't. People just go, people. I don't like driving 100 miles. Forget, the running one is for loot. I absolutely get that.
Yeah. So I guess what I'd love to do is try and, in some ways, bring it back to. Your journey, your story, where you were, you're a busy guy, you were having a career in media, things are going on, and before you know it, you've got a little bit of a roll of fat on your belly. And I'm sure many people listening to this right now will connect with that. And what would you say to those people is say, I'm never going to do an ultra event?
I'm pleased you asked, because I get caught up in myself because I love these long distance races so much, and because for me the journey was, every step was a small step. I didn't just choose to become an ultra runner, and people who hear me sometimes on the Radio 2 breakfast show think, well, but you're the guy that runs 100 miles. And yes, I am now. I'm doing it again next week. But, but I really wasn't always. And I'm absolutely evangelical that it doesn't matter how far, and B, it doesn't matter how fast, but it does matter that you just give running a try, however unfit you are, however bad at it you think you might be, however overweight you might be, however worried you are that other people will look at you and judge you when you go running. None of that actually matters when you're out running. Park run is a great place to start because there are, I mentioned that there are on the start line of an endurance race, there'll be kind of all shapes and sizes and everyone's pleased to see you. Times that by 100 at every single park around the UK on 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. You won't feel out of place. But yes, it's the small steps. It's just getting a little bit outside your comfort zone. And you honestly, so if you're listening to this and thinking running's just not for me, maybe, you're the guy on Radio 2 who keeps on talking about these stupid distances you run. Yes, obviously running's for you, but it's not for me. Please, I would say, just give it a go. Don't feel like you have to actually run much when you first start. Walk, and maybe take 10 running paces during your walk, and next time make it 12. But every time you go out and you come back through your front door, you will not regret having been out, and you will think slightly better about yourself, and you'll sort of give yourself a metaphorical pat on the back for having even done it, and then just see where the journey takes you. It took me to Sparta, frankly.
And that's your journey, right? Yeah. It may not be someone else's journey.
It's not very many people's journey, to be honest, that it took me to Sparta. But I think the reason I'm like a born again runner, I'm evangelical about it, because I wasn't. We ask people during the Olympics. I remember Chris and I, we were broadcasting not from here, from a shipping container on site at London 2012, and all the medalists would be brought to us in this rather kind of forced way that they call it managing victory. Yeah. Anyway, the medalists would be brought to us, and Chris asked, I think it was Jess Ennis-Hill, what's it like being so fit? She said, do you know what? I don't know, because I've always, been sporty. I've always done sport. So this is just me. Well, I do know what it's like to smoke and eat crap and drink too much. And do all sorts of other things that are just not good for you. And I also know what it's like to be fit and relatively fit, and every stage along the way. And it's just wonderful. So however unfit you are, it doesn't matter. Get a bit fitter. You feel better about yourself. You feel better physically, and you feel a lot better mentally. Yeah. So, to answer your question about, it's the journey. Yes, it doesn't matter where you are on the journey. It doesn't matter where the journey's going to, but just get on it, because you really, I promise you, you can see my kind of, again, my body language. I honestly promise anyone who's listening, try it. You will not regret it. Yeah.
Well, I totally agree, Vassos. And you say, you know what it's like to feel better. This podcast is called Feel Better, Live More for a reason, because, I genuinely feel that so many people, and I wonder how you feel about this now, but are not getting the most out of their life because they're just not feeling great. And, are you able to articulate what are those benefits? What are those non-running benefits that running has given to you? How does that affect your day-to-day life?
Well, running is, and having written kind of 2 books about it, basically, I interviewed a lot of people about it. I realised that it ticks a lot of boxes, and it doesn't tick every box for everybody. I think it might tick every box for me, to be honest. But so some people see it as like a form of therapy, and you can absolutely see why it is. And it's not that you're actively working through your problems like you would on a therapist's couch. It's that your brain seems to do a sort of a Control Alt Delete and a kind of refresh, and you just you're better after a run. It gives you some va-va-voom. I work on a breakfast show. Your 4 pillars, the sleep one, I have issues with. Yeah. But and often talk about a mid-afternoon lull when you wake up in the 4 hour. But an hour of sleep or an hour's run, I feel better after an hour's run, much more so than I do after an hour's sleep.
Wow.
The working through a problem. I've got to write a speech that I'm a bit nervous about for a couple of weeks time. and I went for a run, and I wasn't specifically thinking about what to write, but I came back and I thought, and it's all about how to start these things, about how to start. I thought, okay, that's the way in. That's what I'll tell them. And I thought, why didn't I think of that?
But do you know what's fascinating about that?
Yeah.
This is something I've been writing about recently for my book that comes out in a few months, The Stress Solution. Basically, that when you're not focusing on a task, so you're not here, you're not going through your sheet or who you've got to interview or what the sports news is, right? When you're not focused on a task, when you're sort of switching off, a part of your brain called the DMN, the default mode network, right, goes into overdrive. So when you're out for a run, that part of your brain is going into overdrive, and that's a creative part of your brain, which is why so many people get amazing ideas when they've switched off. And I think there's a lesson for everyone in that, in terms of, yes, of course, you get it with running, but anyone can get it actually in, sometimes these days people are so pressured, they just stick there, they sit at their desk, they keep trying to plow through the problem, but just getting outside for a walk for 15 minutes or going for a quick run, you fire up a different part of your brain, which will try and solve problems for you.
No, absolutely. So there's that, there's that kind of huge box that gets ticked by running for a lot of people. And it kind of can't fail to, really, because as you say, it's scientifically proven that that's what happens.
Have you ever got injured? And the reason I'm asking that is after my podcast with Rich, a few people were asking me on social media, they were saying, it all sounds great, I want to, but every time I go running, I get injured. Has that, you obviously speak about running a lot. Has that question come up a lot to you, and what is your answer to that? Yeah,
no, listen, we get injured, runners get injured. My answer, my principal answer, and the kind of my actual principle, the way I kind of live my running life, is that we were born to run. If I was, living 5 million years ago, I would have to run to survive. I would have to chase down this, whatever animal it was across the African plain, and I wouldn't let a knee niggle stop me, because otherwise, I would not survive. So I sort of think that, although this isn't, I don't know if I can give this as advice. I sort of think, I sort of think / know that our bodies find a way. I have an existing knee injury that my body finds a way around, even when I'm running silly distances. And when you start running, especially if you've never done much running before, like me, your gait will be a little bit wrong. You will probably have, your body won't act like it should do. I don't look like Mo Farah when I run, and very few people do. But if I did, I definitely wouldn't get injured, because he has almost the perfect gait. Honestly, look at him; it's amazing. But you don't need necessarily to. There's a marathon runner, an Ethiopian called Jeptu, who runs like an octopus. Her ankles flay out to the side, and she's won the London. I think got the silver medal in London 2012. She then came back next year and won the London Marathon. She's pretty good, and she looks terrible, and she looks like she should have all sorts of problems with her.
That's quite inspiring to hear, I think, because you're right. You watch Mo Farah. There's a real elegance with the way he runs. There's a real sort of majesticness, and if that's what we're aspiring to, it may be off-putting for some of us. So it's quite good to see that. In fact, I'll pull up a video, make sure that we link to that in the show notes. And the show notes page is going to be drchaski.com/Vassos. So everything Vassos and I have spoken about, plus links to various things, including both of Vassos's books, is going to be on the show notes page. Vassos, in fact, on your books, what is the difference between the two books, and what can people expect if they choose to buy them?
Well, the first one is very much kind of my journey into running, but into Spur. So it's 26.2 chapters, obviously.
Love it.
But each one ends with, there's Steve Cram and Paula Radcliffe and the Brownlee brothers and Chrissie Wellington, who we've talked about, and lots of kind of inspirational athletes, and actually some kind of famous people who are runners, how they got into running, what running means to them. Because, people don't often ask Paula about, when did you first run? And Crammy talking about kind of running around the block with his kids, when he was a kid with his friends in Sunderland. So there's that, which I find those much more interesting than my own journey. And it's a sort of celebration, not a sort of celebration, a huge, great, big celebration of what we've been talking about, of running and how it ticks different boxes for different people. And there's also one of my favourite stories, actually, is a guy who I was running home from work from here, and I was on for a PB, I think, and I was pegging it down or up Hammersmith Bridge. And it's got these two buttresses, Hammersmith Bridge. And I come around the corner and there's another guy pegging it the other way. And we clash heads really badly. And we both sort of get knocked a little bit silly. And we're both on the floor. And this guy he's got tattoos all up his neck and on his face. He's got biceps the size of most oak trees, definitely bigger than my thighs. And he starts going for me. And I'm petrified. And I went, but hang on, that's nobody's fault. And he sort of stopped and went, "You're right, sorry." And we sat down. I hadn't noticed them before. There's these like wooden benches in the bridge. And we sat down, we looked at the river, and we were both feeling a little bit dizzy. And we started chatting. And I said, "Look, I probably should have been looking where I was going. I was on for a PB." And he goes, "Oh, do you know what? I was doing the same. I was doing a PB round from Putney Bridge down to here." And then I said, "How? He didn't look like a runner. He didn't have proper running shoes, really. He didn't have running shorts." I said, "How come you're..." I was writing the book, so
yeah.
It was part
in the zone,
of my in my zone, talking about how people got into running. And his story was, he was, I was at school. I was one of the problem kids. I was one fight too many. I was excluded from school, and there's only one place I was heading, and that's prison. He was brought up on that estate just north of Hammersmith Bridge. He said, there was shouting. I'd hear gunshots occasionally. He said he was just going on a downward spiral. And his uncle said to him, "Just try and go for a run." And he doesn't know why he did that first time. And he wasn't fit, but he did. And he went for a run in jeans, he said. And by this time, by the way, I've got my iPhone out and I'm recording him with his permission.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And he told me his name, but then he told me that's not my real name. So call me what you like. I called him in the book. I called him what he said to call him. But and he said, and then that was the first time I got back from the run, and I had done something that I could demonstrably be. He didn't use the word demonstrably, obviously. He said I was just proud of myself for the first time, for a little bit proud. And I thought, I want a bit more of that and a bit more of that. And now I run, and now I'm trying to get a job. I'm sorting myself out. I'm down at the job centre. I'm not on that downward spiral. It stopped a vicious circle becoming worse and started a virtuous circle, which he was on the foothills of, which I love.
It's incredible,
that story.
isn't it? It's just incredible. It's building up his self-esteem. Even I think that goes back to what you said, maybe 10, 15 minutes ago, which is, start small, because, just push yourself a little bit outside your comfort zone. And when you do that, you feel that bit of self-worth that, I've done that. I've managed to do that, and it feels good.
And not just in running, actually.
Yeah.
A wise man, a wise-ish man, actually the man who usually sits in this chair, Chris, Chris said to me quite soon after I first met him, he said, just try and get outside your comfort zone a little bit or a lot every day if you can, because your comfort zone gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and you become a better and better and better and better person. So not just in running, but any way you can find to get outside your comfort zone. I was going to say no to that speech I've got to give in a couple of weeks because it's kind of terrifying. I won't say what it is because I'm too scared, but I didn't say no. And the reason I didn't say no is because it's way outside my comfort zone. But then if I do it, and I don't make a complete hash of it, then suddenly my comfort zone encompasses that as well. Yeah. And it works for running too, but it kind of works in life.
It works for anything. I totally agree. And I've been reflecting on my life recently, and I've seen that I generally have always been attracted to pushing myself outside my comfort zone, because I always find that you kind of find out who you are there and you sort of grow. And I know some people like to do that more than others. I've got a natural tendency to go there. I actually remember when I filmed my first BBC One series of Doctor in the House, and it was pretty intense. I had some very sick people to try and get better with a camera watching my every move. And
for people who don't know telly, you might think that you'd be doing it and the camera's in the background, and the telly's not that intrusive. Telly is massively intrusive. You have to do loads of stuff again and again and again just for the cameras. Could you just do that again? I mean, it's not like life at all, but you have to try and make it like life.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember, I think I'd sort of got over it and I thought, okay, yeah, fine, that worked really well, really enjoyed that. And I remember a week before the first programme aired, so this is the first time I've ever been, I would have at the time been on BBC One and on a prime time show. I was like, okay, this is it's getting a little bit scary now. And my best mate Luke said to me, he's like, in about a week's time, 5 million people are going to watch you do your job. 5 million people don't come into my office and watch me do my job. And I thought, yeah, I was feeling pretty scared before. Now I'm pretty nervous about this. But I think that's some great advice, Vassos. And I think although this is a little bit about running, it goes far beyond running, doesn't it? Before we wrap this up, I just want to touch on one thing, which is technology. So, many of us, myself included, are pretty obsessed with tech and all the incredible benefits that it brings. And a lot of people now are going running with their Garmins or their Apple Watches or their Fitbits, and I became very obsessed with the time on the watch and what distance have they done, what was their heart rate, and all this kind of stuff. And I get that. I think I read something with you that you were talking about that you used to use a Garmin quite a lot and you'd be looking at everything. But then I think the quote was, I run best when I'm just running for the fun of it. Yeah. And I think there was something magical in that. I wonder if you could just elaborate.
Again, it was a light bulb moment when I was at Wimbledon and I was interviewing Serena Williams, in my opinion, the greatest tennis player.
Female
her or
tennis
Roger.
player?
Yeah, her or Roger. Anyway, certainly the greatest female tennis player I will ever interview. And she just won a match at Wimbledon, and I'm interviewing her, and she's telling me about some, she told me off air about some new. It's a sort of a Fitbit. It was one of the earliest Fitbits, and back in the day, something that could could track you and tell you your heart rate and stuff that you wore on your wrist. And I was thinking, oh, maybe I should get me one of those. And then I realised that she'd stopped talking quite a long time ago, and I was still thinking, now, could I? I mean, it's quite expensive, but so if I would be able to not tell my wife, but then is that actually? And she'd stopped talking, and she's trying to wait for me to interview her, And then I panicked and asked the same question I just asked her again, and yes, the interview didn't go well. But I realised at that sort of point that I was too obsessed with the tech, and every run would start with me outside my front door, kind of waving this kind of an early Garmin at the skies, waiting for it to pick up a signal, and I would berate myself if I wasn't going a certain pace, and whether I'm slightly embarrassed at the sort of thoughts that I had during those early runs, and also whether I had the right socks and the right base layer and the right this and the right that, and are my shorts light enough? And it just got me away from the reason I run, which is that we talked about the simplicity. That we talked about the joy, the simple joy actually of running, the childlike joy of running when you could be walking. I loved all that. And so now, I mean, I do have a Garmin on my watch now, but I won't turn it on when I run home, and I don't want to know, because if I know that if I hit Hyde Park or a certain lamppost at a certain time, then I'm doing well or I'm not doing well. But actually, just running on feel.
It's getting more in tune with our bodies again.
Exactly, because that's the point of this.
That's the point.
Do get a bit uncomfortable. I mean, people think you love running, so you go for a run and you've got a big smile on your face every time, and that the act of running brings you actual joy when you're doing it. And sometimes I guess it does, but more often than not, it's not easy. I mean, it's much easier to sit on a tube or get a taxi home and sit down and do my emails than to run the 7 miles home. But I do it, and afterwards I never regret it.
No.
So yes, it's joyful, it's simple, and it's much more pleasurable, I think, without all the tech, without getting too worried about the tech.
I think that's a great message for people. You obviously use the tech if you want to, if it helps get you going, track your distances, fine. But I also get that there's something about getting back in touch with our bodies and nature and
well, there's a sort of expression that several friends of mine at running club use, which is, it didn't happen if it didn't happen on Strava. I have the slight opposite attitude to that, an opinion. I think if it didn't happen on Strava, so much the better. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the whole thing about intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. Are you doing it just for the love, or are you doing it so you can post about it and get all that external validation, which is something that...
Which is fine too.
Which is fine as well. Exactly. It's not about either one necessarily. Well,
I prefer the
internal
intrinsic. But if it takes your mate saying well done to get you running, then fine, go for that.
Exactly. Well, Vassos, look, that's been fabulous chat. I know you have you've had quite a busy morning already, even though we're only at 10:30. Did you run here this morning?
I did, yeah. I did run here this morning.
So what time did you start running this morning?
I would have started running at about 4:40, I guess, this morning.
4:40, wow.
Yeah.
What's that run like in January?
Yes, A, good question. And B, I don't necessarily like running straight out of bed, especially early in the morning / the middle of the night, which is what most people call 4:40. It takes me a mile or two for the legs to get going, and they're really slow. And I find, talking about loving running, that was a real effort, and it always is when I run in. Running home's fine, but running in is always an effort. But I did run in. I will be running home. Well, I've got some filming to do this afternoon, which is also running related.
Oh wow!
So I'll have a
lot of running today.
Yeah, I'll have clocked up a lot of kind of steps on the pedometer today.
Well, just to finish it off then, Vassos, my goal with this podcast is to inspire people to inspire them so that they know that they can be the architects of their own health, basically, that they're in control of much of what happens to them. And I wonder if you could leave the listeners with some simple tips. I normally ask for 4, but no pressure if you can't think of 4, but just some simple tips related to what we've spoken about that people now can actually take on and hopefully implement in their own life.
Well, I guess my tips would all be to get into running, because that's what I'm known for. By the way, that's a lovely thing to try and help people to empower, to empower them to kind of get in, because it's so difficult, isn't it? You hear people talk about running, you hear people like me talk about running, and I almost want to kind of to rewind my own running ability, because I started at 0. I started at -0. And I don't want people to think, well, but that's Vassos.
Yeah. Because it wasn't the old Vassos,
it really
wasn't it?
I don't think of myself as a runner yet, really. So I suppose, okay, I'll think of 4 pieces of advice. First of all, just start. Just start with anything. It could be a walk. You don't need running shoes. You don't need equipment. Just start and see where it takes you, because that is, I think, absolutely key. And like I said before, it took me to this 150-mile race in Sparta, and I loved every moment of the journey along the way. But it's about the journey. It's not about the destination. That's something else you learn about running. It's about being in the moment. And it's very mindful, that, actually. Yeah. So there's another kind of little win that you're getting when you run. So my 4 tips would be, well, I'll give you 3 under the umbrella of just start.
Yeah.
First of all, walk. If you think running's not for me, then don't run. Just walk, and then just do a few extra running steps every time you go out, and you'll be surprised how quickly it builds up. Number 2, always remember that it's most hard at the start. When you start running, it's least comfortable when you first start doing it, obviously. And kind of don't think, oh, look, I've tried it a couple of times. Now my ankle hurts. It's not for me. Just try and keep going with it, because it's at its worst, at its earliest. And number 3, try and do it with a smile on your face. Don't think you have to do it at a certain pace or go a certain, distance. If you can't do 5K, don't do 5K. Don't do 1K. Just do it with some joy, because you're doing something for yourself. And so kind of give yourself that credit. And honestly, if you do those 3 things, I can't see how you can fail.
Vassos, brilliant. Great tips for people. Thank you for joining me today. And hopefully we will get to go on a run together at some point in the near future.
Well, you're in London. Yeah, I'll hold you to that.
That concludes today's episode of the Feel Better, Live More podcast. I hope that you have found the conversation enjoyable and that it has inspired you to increase the amount of movement that you are getting in your everyday life. If you are already pretty active yourself, please do consider sharing this episode with someone close to you who you feel may benefit from hearing Vassos' story. Now, if you did enjoy this episode, I would recommend that you check out one of the earlier episodes of this podcast, episode 15, Treating Depression and Anxiety with Dynamic Running Therapy. You can access that if you go to drchaski.com/William Pullen. Now, don't forget, full show notes of this episode are available on my website at drchaski.com/Vassos. If you go to this page, you can find lots of links to everything that we discussed on the show, including articles and videos. And don't forget to pay a visit to today's sponsors, Athletic Greens. Remember, there is a special offer with your first order worth £70, which you can access at athleticgreens.com/live more. As always, it would be great if you could help me to spread awareness about this podcast. The best ways are to leave a review on whichever platform you are listening to this on, such as Apple or Acast. You could even take a screenshot on your phone right now and share on your social media channels, or the good old-fashioned way by simply letting your friends know about the podcast. For those of you new to the podcast, my first book, The 4-Pillar Plan, is available to buy all over the world, so do consider picking up a copy. Just be aware that in America and Canada, it has been released with a different title, How to Make Disease Disappear. In just over 2 months now, I am really excited that my second book, The Stress Solution, comes out. You can pre-order that book right now to ensure that you get your hands on a copy the day that it is released. That's it for today on the Feel Better, Live More podcast. I hope you have a fabulous week. Make sure you have pressed subscribe, and I will be back next week for the latest conversation. Remember, you are the architect of your own health. Making lifestyle change is always worth it, because when you feel better, you live more. I'll see you next time.